Good morning to all, and let me on behalf of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee warmly welcome all of our officials to this meeting of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. I would like to welcome officials of the Ministry of Finance Investments Division, the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, and of course the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Sport TT. My name is Wade Mark, and I'm the chairman of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. Now, our committee has a mandate to consider and report to the House of Representatives on the following: the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of all state enterprises that are owned or controlled by or on behalf of the state. The Auditor General's report on any such accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements, and whether policy is being carried out in conformity with the principles of efficiency, effectiveness, and economy, and whether expenditure conforms to the authority which governs it. Now, the purpose of our meeting today is to examine the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial years 2019 and 2020, as well as follow up on the implementation of the recommendations in the committee's second report from the 11th Parliament. Now, our committee is desirous of hearing from you the challenges being faced not only by the sports company of TNT in its attempt to determine some of solutions that you will want to address given the challenges, but we also would like to look at the role of our committee and how we can help this very important company improve on its delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. Now, our meeting is being broadcast live on Parliament's Channel 11, on Radio 105.5 FM, and of course on the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can send their comments related to today's inquiry to our email, that is parl101@ttparliament.org, Facebook/TT Parliament, or at Twitter @TT Parliament. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to invite members of our committee to introduce themselves to our officials at this time. So I'll ask my colleague to introduce himself and then others.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Keith Scotland, member.
Good morning, everyone, and I'll follow in Seniors Lead. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, everyone. I'm Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, member.
I would also like to take this opportunity to invite officials from the Ministry of Finance to introduce themselves.
Good morning. I am Sharon Mohammed, Director, Agro-Based Manufacturing and Services Sector, Investments Division.
Good morning, everyone. Ryan Maharaj, Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Finance, Investments Division.
Thank you. Can I invite now the Ministry of Sport and Community Development to introduce your team?
Good morning, everyone. Angela Edwards, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
Good morning to all. Gabriel Jesu Mactier, Director of Physical Education and Sport Division, Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
Do you have any other
Yes.
persons from the Ministry of Sport
Good
and
morning,
Community
everyone.
Development?
My name is Wilfred Fullerton, and I'm the Technical Director of the Project Management Unit for the Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
Good morning, everyone. Ms. Anne Belmontes, Research Officer to Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
Good morning, Jacqueline Weeks-Benko, Planning Coordinator, Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
And anyone else from the Ministry of Sport and Community Development? If not, may I now invite the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago to introduce their team at this time, the officials from their team, that is.
Good morning, all. Douglas Camacho, Chairman of Sport TT, and I'll hand over to the Acting CEO, Mr. Kyron Surrett. Apologies from the substantive CEO. He, not sure what you're supposed to say in the public domain, but he had a medical procedure and was unable to be here and is on some extended leave.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
Kyron?
Camacho. Yes. Mr. Sarrett?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Kyron Serrett, Acting CEO and Substantive Head Partnerships and Alliances at the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago. I will allow my team members to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Tejmani Richardson.
Good morning, everyone. Tejmani Richardson, Head Internal Audit, Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, everyone. David Ince, Head Facilities Management, Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Anyone else?
Good morning, everyone. Ansuya Babwa, Head of Accounts, Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, everyone. Ruan Payson, Head Employee Experience and Central Services.
Good morning, everyone. Arlene George, General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, everyone. Anisha Colley, Head of Projects Execution, Sports Company.
Good morning, all. Leon Ramley, Director, Sport TT.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Justin Latipi George, Head Sport Development in the Sport Development and Performance Unit, the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, once again, may I, on behalf of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, welcome all of you. And before we get into our inquiry, it is incumbent upon us to ask, as we normally do, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Sport and Community Development to make some brief opening remarks, not exceeding 3 minutes, and to be followed by Mr. Camacho, who is the chairman of the Sport TT. So, Madam PS, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning again, everyone. The Ministry of Sport and Community Development is the line ministry with responsibility for the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago. The ministry looks forward to the inquiry and its efforts to identify where there might be areas we would need to strengthen or areas we need to improve in our delivery of the sport mandate. The ministry has a very good partnership and a strong collaboration with the Ministry of Sport and Community, with Sport TT, and we expect that will continue going into the future as we prepare for the upcoming Commonwealth Youth Games and all the other sporting initiatives that are due to happen this year. So we are here to support and to provide whatever information is asked of us in the best way possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Camacho, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We at Sport TT are really the executing arm on behalf of the state, with very clear mandate for some selected facilities in the case of the physical infrastructure of sport in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as responsibility for 15 of the national governing bodies in sport. So we don't have responsibility for all 60 or whatever the total number is, but really for what was considered, I guess, the top 15. That was the intent when it was created many, many years ago. With regard to today's proceedings, we have done a very comprehensive reply to the previous meeting, but we stand ready to bring any clarity. I suppose, Chairman, I'm not sure the process again, but I presume we take it as read. But we stand ready to bring any clarity that may be required of members, and as well to answer any additional questions which members may have about either what is in the reports or anything that they consider germane and pertinent to today's proceedings, as you yourself as Chair would have articulated in your agenda for today. Thank you.
Yes, well, once again, thank you and welcome to all officials to our inquiry this morning. Now, I would like to begin by complimenting the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago for at least having your audited financial accounts relatively up to date. We are dealing with 2019-2020 financial audited accounts, and we know that 2021 is outstanding. I know that 2022 is to be concluded and submitted. So before we commence formally some of my areas of interest that I'd like to clarify, could we get from the sports company of TNT, when would the 2021 audited financial accounts be submitted to the relevant ministry, and through the ministry to the Ministry of Finance, and then through that body to our Parliament? Do you have any idea?
Chairman, that was sent in already. They would have received 2021, and in fact our report would have been published in the press. We usually are the first, with all due respect to my colleagues in the other state enterprises, to have ours submitted, and we submitted within 6 months of the fiscal year, fully audited and provided to the line ministry, and I guess for onward transmission, but the PS could speak to that, to the Ministry of Finance, and they could speak to the fact of whether they have it or not. We're right up to date, Chairman. There's nothing outstanding.
Okay. Madam Permanent Secretary, can you tell us where that report has gone?
We have received the financial statements for 2021, should have been forwarded to Ministry of Finance. So I'm not sure what would have happened, Chairman, but we would have received it and forwarded it to Ministry of Finance.
Yeah. All right, well then maybe the Ministry of Finance can advise whether they have received that report and what is delaying its submission to the Parliament so that we can have them properly before us.
Thank you for the question, Chairman. We wish to advise that the 2021 financial statements was accepted at an annual meeting in March 2022, and under cover of a memorandum dated March 24, 2022, it was submitted to Parliament. For the 2022 financial statements, those were accepted at an annual meeting in February 2023, and subsequently it was submitted to Parliament on the 13th of February 2023 via memorandum.
So you're saying to us that the two reports for 2021,
2022 and 2023. 2020.
No, for
2021.
All right, 2021 was submitted on what date to the Parliament?
24th of March, 2022.
And the other one?
The 2022 financial statement was sent to Parliament on the 13th of February, 2023.
All right. Well, we will have to do some checking here. I'm sorry about that, but we'll check because from the information we got, those reports are not in our possession. So I'm happy that you have advised that we have them. And I want to again compliment all things being equal. And we will do a search on those submissions, and we shall report before the end of this meeting whether those reports have actually arrived. Okay? All right, so thank you again once more. Now, Mr. Camacho, I would like to begin by going to an earlier statement that you made. And you did indicate that the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago has a clear mandate. And I have before me what is your mandate, and you can at least guide me as to whether I'm wrong based on what I have before me. You are dealing with the management, administration, and programming of sport, as well as the construction and operational maintenance of sporting facilities throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Can I take that to represent the mandate of the company?
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, that, and I guess under the management we will capture the elements I spoke about where we have responsibility and oversight for the 15 NGBs,
right,
which is where the programs of sport itself actually reside and are effected. We do it in partnership with the NGBs as well as in partnership with communities. So outside of just the NGBs themselves, the partnership extends with us, a tripartite, I guess we could call it, between Sport TT's officers, the NGB and their resources, and the communities where we carry sporting programs to.
Mm-hmm.
So it ties into the NGBs, but it's specifically targeting as well, as we call it, cradle to grave, grassroots to elite.
Right. Now, we recognize that, and I think that we will all agree, that in this tsunami of crime that is afflicting and affecting every single one of us and our respective families, the role of sport is extremely important because young people are involved in a lot of the deviant behavior that we are experiencing, and a lot of young people are perishing as a result of the disorder that has arisen and that is manifested through crime and violence. So I wanted to ask you, what is the role of Sport TT in the following areas? Promoting sport tourism, bringing about greater economic diversification as a result, and generating opportunities, employment opportunities for our young people. And most importantly, how are we using the various facilities available to Sport TT to get our tens of thousands of young people, either at the primary and secondary level, have those young people access these facilities so that, for instance, the energy that they have at their disposal can be properly channeled into those areas that would fall under your control, whether it's the National Aquatic Center, whether it is the cycling velodrome, whether it is the tennis courts, the national tennis court that we have available, whether it has to do with all these community swimming pools throughout the country. We have a facility in Diego Martin, in Bagatelle. We would like you to share with us and through us, how is this sport company meeting its mandate and using those facilities to promote, as I said, sport tourism, economic diversification, employment opportunities, and make it accessible to the tens of thousands of our school children at the primary and secondary school level. Those resources and facilities accessible to them. So if you could give us an appreciation and overview before we drill down into specifics.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you touch on many things, so I've made some notes. The first is sports as a vehicle. The phrase I've often used, and permit me, in our previous hat as Chairman of the Olympic Committee, that I've been using for the last 20 years. I see sport as a critical vehicle for the development of the human being. And by definition, if we could divert more human capital towards it, qualified and competent human capital, more resources, financial, etc., I think what we will see is not just crime, and I think you're very right. I think sport, I was a little disappointed that big symposium over the last couple of days, and sport in my mind, and culture, and I'll make a plug here for culture, weren't specifically identified. I don't know what they would call it, a workshop, a little session, specifically using that as two tools, because not just in Trinidad, that was a Caribbean one, but it is true to say that in the Caribbean, what has defined us most in international eyes is our sporting people and our cultural people, more so than our business people and all the other people that drive the economy in a more meaningful way. So from my perspective, I think that is the first point I want to make to your first observation of sport as a vehicle. I just use my own words there, right? With regard to, and I'll break up the bits into tourism, young people, I call them young people, primary, secondary school, the masses, as I call it, sport for all when I was referring to it earlier, and elite. Starting with the youth, it is interesting that in our structure in Trinidad and Tobago, the responsibility some time ago for direct intervention in primary and secondary schools where sport is concerned was moved from the many juggles of the various ministries and the iterations over the last, well, I'm only in sports admin for 52 years, but over that 52 years, it has now ended up in the last maybe 20 or 30 years with the Ministry of Education. That has been a challenge where, to my mind, the spirit of volunteerism that pervaded when I was an athlete in my youth seems to not be as prevalent. Teachers don't volunteer their time as readily as back in the day after hours, right? So that the whole ethos of sport as a critical component of your educating a human being seems to have waned. Combination, to my mind, of what I've just described, the reticence of teachers to volunteer their time selflessly, parents who make it a binary choice for a child, you know, sport or your studies. And sadly, in our environment, very often that means they go to school supposedly for the study part of the education, and then when they leave school, they have to go to classes for the same thing all over again, taking up time from sport. And as you realize, I'm fairly passionate about the sport angle, so I feel quite disappointed. But that is a phenomenon that I've been seeing for the last couple of decades. In the recent past, we have actively pursued the Ministry of Education with what we call at Sport TT a bipartisan approach to seeing how we could bring back sport into schools in a more meaningful way. I think it's no secret that the two ministers responsible for sport and education would have even recently paid a visit in a bilateral thing with the Jamaican government to see how we could partner to share our successes, for instance, in our intercol football and those things, and in our cricket where our programs tend to be better, and our other sports where our programs are better, and with Jamaica in the athletic program, which from a success point seems to be better, but we're built on a whole different foundation. So I think it is an area that we recognize is critical, because without that, you don't have the feeder stock for the other things we're going to speak about. I'll touch on tourism now next, in that certainly when I was asked to be chairman a couple of years ago of the sport company, one of the things we identified is we, the taxpayers, have spent a fortune on creating world-class facilities, and we have not found the way yet to truly maximize the income and revenue stream. And it is interesting that by pure happenstance, Kyron, who's acting as CEO and is here today, is the person that we charge with the responsibility, as you heard him give you his primary designation as development and so on, where we have very diligently set out to get particularly our major facilities. You highlighted a few, aquatic center, you mentioned the cycle velodrome, you didn't mention the racket center, but I will throw it in there because it's another one that we're very close to getting a designation. We have a bronze provisional certification, as it's no secret. The velodrome has received UCI accreditation as an internationally recognized cycle center for the UCI, which is the international body. The swimming one, it is in works, but not yet completed. So that is how we intend to try to monetize the value and earn as well in the process foreign exchange, create jobs, bring sport to be an integral part of the economic activity of the country and not just seen as a recreational part, which I think in many, many people's minds, they think of sports still as a recreational thing and don't see the value on the economic and the other fronts. With regard to the issue of maximizing the use of the facilities under our purview, we have an online system that allows for bookings. We encourage people to book. And let me be very clear that, again, one of the early things that we had identified is that there's no free lunch. And I say that to say that even national governing bodies who want use, we have a charge for it. What we have done is we say to them, for national sporting activities and particularly youth-type sporting activities, developmental activities, we charge the NGB, but then in our subvention grant that we make every year, we ask for funds to support the NGB. So that in essence, Chairman, it's a non-cash transaction, so they don't have to put out the cash and they have access. But we recognize that there's an economic value attached to the use. Because my experience as well is when people think things are free, they treat with it as if it is free, and if they mash it up, somebody's going to put it back there for them for free. But there's no such thing. So we have sought to change the whole mindset and ethos of certainly Sport TT first, and the wider public and the NGBs over the last 4 or 5 years towards having a different way of looking at these things and a greater appreciation of what it is we, the taxpayers, have put there for our use. With your leave, Chairman, I would ask Kyron, who really drives the development side of our activities, if he would like to just say a few words that may supplement it, because as you realize as Chairman, I'm non-executive and therefore have nowhere near the depth of knowledge I'm sure he has.
Before Kyron, rather speaks, I would like him to follow up and clarify your earlier point, that relationship between the Ministry of Education and the sports company. We would like to find out what is being done to get our primary and secondary school students involved in the full utilization of the facilities that we have constructed. And we know that you talked about a charge. What could be done or what is being done to facilitate some subsidization by the very ministries so that our youths can have more accessibility to those facilities. So when Mr. Serret has responded, if you could kind of give us some perspective on that. Because the reason why I'm raising that, I may be wrong and you can guide me on it. These facilities are not being utilized in the kind of way they ought to be utilized. And many of our young people who would like to have access, they cannot have access because it's a charge, it's a fee, as Mr. Camacho said. And some of them just don't have the income to meet those fees. So what are we doing to ensure that some mechanism is established to allow persons to use those facilities without destroying their infrastructure, as Mr. Camacho said. So, Mr. Serret, in responding, if you could just give us a perspective, we'll appreciate it. And I'll ask Mr. Scotland to follow up after.
Thank you, Chairman. So I guess I'll start with the last one first with regards to the primary and secondary schools, how it is we attempt to engage them. Sport Company, as an entity, we have reached out to the chief education officer and so on for the different districts to have that same sort of discussion with that same goal in mind. We've had different levels of success because everything is a process. There are challenges, especially around things like water. So we've had to go back to what are some of the key things we need to look at in terms of allaying the fears for things like, learning how to swim and so on. And if you take, for instance, the activities by the Ministry of Sport in terms of the things like April pools and so on, to create what I would say clients or users of the facility, because that's the next thing. If you look at the specialist facilities that we have, we also have to go through a process of creating new users. The cycling velodrome, I don't know if you have been before, but it's the bank. It's not something that you could just jump on a BMX bike and go on, right? You have to learn. We have to do that deliberate process. So in terms of understanding that role of creating users, what Sport Company has done is also empowered the NGBs with regards to that and their development outreach programs, saying, listen, we've identified the schools as a catchment. What are you doing as part of your development program? What are you doing in terms of reaching out to the schools? Sport Company, through the ministry, if need be, will assist, right, in terms of creating that connection. But, we need to operate through you. So we've done at least our bit in terms of empowering the NGBs, who are our key stakeholders in reaching the population in terms of the different sports. Outside of that, we've had different interventions, as I mentioned. If you look at the tennis facility, we have been working closely with the Tennis Association in terms of devising the programs and then determining exactly how we want to roll it out with that in mind. We have identified, as you said, the primary and secondary schools as a key catchment. I think I could also speak to the recent activities of the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, some representatives from Sport Company, and the Ministry of Education, who recently went to Jamaica. And that conversation in terms of how do we bring everything together, because it has been, we know we want to achieve the same thing, but in terms of determining exactly what is the best way for us to implement and roll this out, I think we are in a good place coming out of the study tour and trips to Jamaica in terms of developing a plan where that is concerned. So I am confident that we should be seeing more activity as relates to sport in schools, and then the spillover effect with regards to use of the facilities, the specialist facilities and just facilities in general, both community and the nationals.
All right. I'll ask Mr. Scotland to come in at this time.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning again, everyone. The Chairman, through you, as part of the mandate of this Public Accounts Enterprise Committee, under our section 101, subsection 2, as part of our mandate, it is to, in the performance of our duties, to consider whether policy is carried out efficiently, effectively, and economically. I have heard the Sport Company outline, well, first I heard the Chairman rule the non-invite to the two-day symposium, I would say that it was open to all you, and your input would have been appreciated either online or in person. But I noted at question 1, your response as it relates to the strategic plan, which you annexed at Appendix 5. What updates were made to the strategic plan, your last strategic plan?
Well, between then and now, the strategic plan of the intervening period is just about to come to an end. And I want to say maybe 2 or 3, starting last year, but about 2 months ago, we concluded all the preliminary work on the strategic plan for the period 2024 to 24, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 28, a 5-year strat plan. So that will be very current. So we are the last year of the previous 5-year strategic plan, which
is 2018 to 2023.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So we now have a new strategic plan which we are rolling out and which will go through the usual channels. I think it was already sent to the Ministry of, our line ministry, the Ministry of Sport. I presume does it go to the Ministry of Finance? It went to Finance. Went to Finance as well, I'm advised. So that I can't say, Chairman, whether that one went to the Parliament, but I suppose the Ministry of Finance, if that is something that they need to lay in Parliament, I don't know, may have done so. But our strategic plan, member, it is current. There is a current one, which is before us, and it takes on board a lot of what I've been speaking about here, that pivoting to a new focus of trying to make sport self-sufficient. You know, the chairman had asked, how can we help? As a simple thing for us is, Sport TT does not have the ability to retain revenue. You might say, that sounds illogical. But Sport TT is, I guess, under the company's ordinance, but is a state enterprise, and under the, and I might have the name wrong, but it could be the Exchequer Act or something, it is not designated as an entity that could retain its own revenue. So if we went out, for instance, and rented the stadium to a concert artist for $500,000 or whatever the cabinet figure is, because it's a whole schedule of what the fees are, the funds don't come to sport company. It goes to the consolidated fund, and of course we then have to apply through the usual process of annual budgets, etc. So it is, remember, that is the sort of thing that we have put back into the strategic plan to try and drive that. Now, it sounds like a simple thing, but if it is something that could be granted to the sports company, just think of the economic value of, Chairman mentioned the velodrome, of going to, I don't know, American Airlines, you know, since we're in the basketball season internationally, and saying to American Airlines, would you like a sponsorship, a 5-year sponsorship, at a significant sum because of the value, and we give you a name and rights, and that revenue comes in on a consistent basis to the velodrome to help the maintenance of the velodrome. It would take the burden off of us, the taxpayer, to have to do that directly. But we can't do that. We don't have the means to do that. If we did it, the funds going to the consult fund with no necessary nexus between where it comes from and where it needs to go to. So it's a simple thing, member, but it is an area that collectively the Parliament or whoever needs to decide, I don't know with whom that authority resides, but with whomsoever it resides, if they could make sports company a collector of revenue where we could collect it and hold it on our own behalf, much appreciated.
You mean a custodian of your own revenue. But
that's the word.
Let me ask you another question, which is even more current. You did speak about the issue of crime and how sport can help to alleviate and help to divert energies in a more positive way. You will agree with me that sport is an outlet that can do that. If we don't agree on the premise, then we can't continue.
Absolutely, 100% on side with that statement.
That being said, have you included specifically in your strategic plan from 2024 to 2029, that plan, an area dedicated to the sport company being a driving force in order to bring energies of the young people in particular, to divert it away from criminal activity towards sports? Have you included a specific plan or a specific rubric in your strategic plan for 2024 to 2028?
Member, thanks. I'm glad you asked me that question. The short answer is yes, but I didn't wait a sports company, speaking on behalf of sports, TT now, we didn't wait for the plan 24 to 28. We actually specifically got the approval of our line ministry to broaden the definition of our mandate to include our involvement in community activity, and have planned in 2023, this fiscal year, we actually rolling out a program particularly targeting, and the word we keep that has been brought to the Sport TT, high-risk areas is how they refer to it as, across a number of sports, and engaged in partnership with the NGBs to run those programs. Karen, I'm not sure which one of our members would be best, you or whether Justin, to speak to the program plan. Right, I'm advised Justin. So, Chairman, with your leave, and member, I'd ask Justin Latipi George to just give a little high level, because, I mean, it could take all day if you really get us too wound up about sport. Justin, what the plans are for this year with regard to the program we're running out, that community set of programs?
Good morning, Chair, member. So the straight answer to the question at hand is that we have looked at this 22-23 fiscal period to start what we consider development programs. Development programs are recognized as those that target kids, and by kids I mean that under 12 age group, and works its way all through the sub-18, sub-23. That particular group are those that you target for one they call total participation, which is really encouraging you to understand sport, the intricacies of sport, learning the basic standard techniques and all that drives it, all the way through putting those that have shown the propensity to be national athletes, to be high school athletes, what have you, to take them along that pathway that sees them getting those skills and developing and harnessing those skills that would allow them to contribute to national sport and sport in general.
Well, Chairman, through you again, as part of that process, because there seems to be a dichotomy in one area. So you are in charge of certain facilities. You've said that there are certain, there's a new focus and a foci on sport as being a driving force to divert energies. But in some of those communities, the NGOs, the youth club, the persons who are organizing events in the area may not be able to have the finances, Chairman, in order to rent those facilities. Now, I understand what you're saying. You're saying, look, if it's free, they feel that they can do with it what they want because it is free. However, some persons and some organizations may just not have the wherewithal to be able to rent, let's say, I don't know if you're responsible for the aquatic center. I'm almost certain I think that you are responsible for the aquatic center. How do you intend as a responsible organization to partner with legitimate bodies who have such plans to bring what we call positive activity to the community, but may not have the resources?
The program that we're speaking about here is being funded by we the taxpayer, but through Sport TT. So that as we reach out to these communities in this program that we're speaking about, we're not asking them to pay. So the program would be a Sport TT program in partnership with the NGBs and the community groups, etc., and the Ministry of Sport, because the Ministry of Sport is sport and community development. So this is why I said it was, remember if you remember my opening comment there was that we had broadened the definition of our responsibility to encompass what in a narrow context of, if you read it literally, would have suggested was beyond the remit of Sport TT and would reside solely with the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. But working in conjunction with them, we rolling out this, and rolled it out last year in 22 as well. This program I'm speaking about, and to your direct question, member, the individuals and the groups aren't asked to fund it because we are funding it, and it is within our budget. So we make representation to the ministry, we provide the budget, the ministry sends it to finance, finance releases it, ministry releases it to us, we finance it. We pay the little stipend for the coaches, etc., because volunteerism, the first question when you ask for a volunteer nowadays, the volunteer asks, how much you paying me? And I say, well, I misunderstand the dictionary meaning, but anyhow. So we recognize that it's a different world we live in, so we actually have all of that factored in, member, inclusive of, I guess, Chairman, it kind of goes to providing economic value to some people, employment to some people, as they actually are engaged in the program full-time to roll out these programs. Member?
Chairman, through you, and this goes to the Ministry of Sport maybe and Community Development. So you have, let's say, an NGO, or Chairman, you have a youth group, a police youth group, let's say, from Aruka, from Carenage. They want to hold a family day at one of your facilities. How do they go about, for the members of the listening public, let's do a quick 3-point plan. How can they go about accessing this so they are able to have these events? Let me give a live example. At St. Paul Street, there is a tournament, a football tournament that we have on top the hill at Clifton Towers. But we are looking to expand it. If we go to Beverly Hills, we don't have a facility there, but we want maybe to use a facility on the ground level. How do these entities go about accessing this? And from what you have told me, there's a involved process. Ministry of ComDev, then Ministry of Finance. By the time we had the approval, Chair, the event pass. Tell us, give us a quick pass. You know, we're going to Disney, we want a quick pass. We don't want to line up in the lines. How do we circumvent that in order to expedite that link? Because the communities, we need an injection now, you know. Not tomorrow. Yesterday. Now, yes. So tell us, how is it done?
Thank you, Member and Chairman, for that question. Chairman, with your leave, I will ask my Director, Sport, Mr. Mate, to respond to that question.
Good morning to all, and thank you for the opportunity to answer. So the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, apart from the facilities that the sports company would have the responsibility for indoor sport arena and community swimming pools. At this particular point in time, the access by community members, by sports groups, youth groups, as the case might be, to our facilities is free to them in terms of being able to access them. Of course, there is a minimal fee that needs to be paid as it relates to usage of our indoors and our community swimming pools. I think the usage of our indoor facilities is something like $15 an hour. And the use of our community swimming pools for, let's say, the Learn to Swim or the recreational swim programs is a matter of, what, $3 and some cents for the particular session. So, however, if I may say, if, let's say, a particular group wants to host an event at one of our indoor facilities, and they wish to have a reduced cost or to host it for free based on how much the particular invoice will cost, they can apply for a waiver of those fees.
No, but Chairman, for you, how do they access
it?
Well,
that's it. Well, I'm gonna get to that. So the entity will go to the facility, book the facility, get an invoice. They will come to the ministry.
Which ministry?
Ministry of Sport and Community Development, with a letter requesting.
Where do they go? Give me some
okay.
detail.
You want proper details.
Yes, in other words, what we're doing here, we want a tutorial for those who be listening.
I didn't know you want to get so granular. So
No, but you can do it in a quick way. You go ahead, do that, and you get it approved.
All right. So first and foremost, the entity goes to the facility, receives an invoice, indicates that they would like to get a waiver of fees. They will apply through the Physical Education and Sport Division of the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, providing a letter and that invoice. A letter, of course, requesting the waiver, and that letter is directed to the Permanent Secretary. The Physical Education and Sport Division will, according to the waiver policy that we have, provide a recommendation to the Permanent Secretary, who will evaluate and pass it on to the Minister of Sport and Community Development for approval. Once it is that approval is provided, then the entity is engaged to let them know what the value of that waiver would be, and also the facility is also notified as to the waiver, and that actually is in place for both facilities under the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, as well as facilities under the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Just a follow up on my colleague's thing. How long this process takes?
Chairman, you're reading my mind.
The process can take about 2 weeks, depending, of course, on making the entity, how quickly the entity actually does provide the information and how detailed their particular submission is, once it has followed all the criteria that we need to follow.
Once they follow all that, how long it actually takes?
It could take about 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay. How many people are aware of what you have just said? In other words, those sporting organizations, those groups and so on that my colleague referred to. Is it something advertised? How do you build awareness? Because I don't think, based on what my colleague has said, and based on our own experiences, I don't think that many groupings within communities, legitimate groupings, are fully conscious of what you may have just shared with us. How do you, what kind of awareness and education program you have out there to market and advertise these things so that citizens in groupings, legitimate groupings, would be able to access those facilities?
We have not necessarily advertised the waiver program.
Okay.
We have, through the Physical Education and Sport Division, held workshops with sporting groups, guiding them as to what our programs are, how they can access our facilities, and so. Of course, we always have to take into account that while we wish to make sure that everybody can access our facilities and access them probably for free based on the economic situation, that there is the need to also generate some level of revenue. So that matter would probably mean that we don't necessarily let it be known fully that the facilities can be accessed for free.
Director, wait.
You
see, I think Mr. Scotland is making a very important point, and I think we all recognize it. We are, some people say we are in a civil war. Some people say we're in almost like a permanent state of self-imposed emergency. These are times that require, innovative thinking. We have to think outside of the box. Is the sports company, along with the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, conscious of the environment? Have they formulated a proposal, maybe for 12 months or 20 months or 2 years, given the situation, to take it to the government so that, for instance, you can have, for instance, resources being allocated by the state through the government in order to facilitate what we are talking about? Because as he said, we can't wait for tomorrow. These things are happening now, as of yesterday. So I'm just asking whether any attempts are being made by the ministry and the sports company to come up with proposals to take to the relevant, let's say to the cabinet, to have such a facility made available so that there would be accessibility. Is that kind of thinking operating at this time? Because you just said you have to hide because you don't want to make it known. Because if you make it known,
it is known. It is known, but to say we will advertise,
I understand,
or waiver is something that also conflicts with the ability to try to or the ability to generate revenue. So
yes,
the fees to utilize our facilities are, as I would have mentioned, fairly minimal at this point in time. However, if there are particular events that need to be held that would have naturally carry up the fees to a certain extent, we have something in place for that. And it's up to, if it is the entity in discussion with the administrators at our facilities would desire to get a waiver, they are advised of the process to do so.
Mr. Director, let me just ask my colleague to come in, jump in here.
Thank you. Ministry Sport, let me firstly compliment you all on, you've said that your business plan for 2024, 2028 is in train, and that's good, and your audited records seem to be almost 2021, that's in real time, that's almost like 2023. So we understand that you have the macro going, but I want to say this, that Chairman, on Monday and Tuesday of this week, we saw prime ministers from the region leave whatever they're doing in their country and come to Trinidad and Tobago to recognize that violence and crime is becoming a public health issue. So that is where we are. The significance, Chairman, through you, of them leaving their countries, leaving the management and coming to Trinidad means that we have recognized that not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the Caribbean, we are facing something that is challenging. I would like, through you, Chair, to suggest a sport company, in order to drive the process to make sport a viable option, even if it's just for energy, for people, what we call to break a sweat in the communities, to come together, to give us, Chairman, through you, within a week, so we can publish the facilities that you have and the ability for the public and community-based, faith-based NGOs to access it. I'm not saying if you're having a concert, I don't know, Chairman, if maybe Buju Banton is coming sometime, that is to be done for free. The answer to that is no, because that's an income generating. But for a community to come together, that is priceless, so that there are no borderlines. Would you be able, Chairman, to change your latitude and give us that? This is Tobago, we have XXO, this is the process to access. These are the fees. If there's a nominal fee, because we are not into, we're not into handouts. If it's a nominal fee, they must pay the nominal fee. If there's a contract, well, you keep the place clean, you leave a deposit in case we have to clean up after you. That is the norm. And you cover your fees. Would you be able to give us within, and I think 2 weeks, Chair, is a little too long, within a week, the facilities throughout the country and the ability and the process to access these facilities with contact numbers for persons? So the first thing, Chair, I don't know if we have a secretariat, the list of the facilities under the control of sport or the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, which will be available for the public to use, or both. 2, the ability to access. How do we access it? Give us a template. Yes, give us a roadmap and give us and attach the cost, because we don't want to start on the premise that it's for free, because part of the uplifting communities is responsibility, and we mustn't always be seeking handouts. Chairman, can I, through you, ask for that as a matter of urgency?
I'll take a first crack and then I'll hand over to the ministry for their bit. Certainly from a sport TT perspective, we could give you that now, maybe before we leave if you want, the actual list that falls under our remit, right? We could give you what, according to the state enterprise, whatever, performance manual that we have to follow, what are the cabinet-determined rates, which is the, let me call it the rack rate. If I could use such a term, I guess people understand what I'm saying, right? Of what that means. In the context of members' question about if people come to us, we do that all the time. They come to us and ask, and if it's particularly the community-based type activities where we realize the value goes beyond the sport per se, but it is more, we act usually with alacrity. We don't have the constraints that a ministry would naturally have, because if we've been given, delegated the authority, we make the decision. But in saying that, let me be very clear, member, that elite activities like the velodrome, things like pools, and particularly pools from a life and safety perspective, aren't things that somebody comes and says, I want to take your pool, that you give it to them and then people drown and they say, well, who tell you to give them when they can't swim? So let me be very clear that certain facilities, particularly the high-performance facilities, are not necessarily the facilities we encourage that type of activity. Certainly the playing fields, the indoor courts, the things where we're not exposed to those types of risks and where the state's billion-dollar expenditure of our taxpayer money over the last, I don't know, 20 years will get damaged to the point that that Karen had made earlier. You don't want to put somebody in the velodrome because they have a bike. Then they fall down because the velodrome is so steep and they just can't handle it. So subject to that, member, absolutely. And we do it already. So we could make it available, and we certainly could make it available to this parliamentary committee on our side. Minister?
Yeah, before Ministry speaks, I think what is being requested is that Mr. Camacho, and taking the caveats that you have outlined, the point about it is that we just want to get like a list. And so once we have that, and as you indicated, those high-performing facilities that would require training, no ordinary person can just access your high facilities like these pools, aquatic center. You have to be trained. These pools are very deep. It's not a 2 feet thing. You could go in, you jump, you're dead if you can't swim. So we understand what you're saying, but I think what we're talking about are facilities that the community can access without the risk associated with
absolutely, but we'll give it a whole list anyway because we have it, and it's easy to handle that.
I have a philosophical difference, you know. Those high quality facilities, the government has expended millions, sometimes billions of dollars. Sometimes when you drive past them, they look like ghost towns.
Yes,
we understand the due diligence that you must do, and I expect if someone comes, you will say, well, these are the criteria or the preconditions to qualify. But it's my respectful submission, Chairman, through you, and member, that these are some of the facilities that we need people to go into and use them. Don't let, as the old people say, cobweb, take them. Subject, of course, to the due diligence and all the practical considerations and safety considerations. But to bring communities out, let people feel a part of these facilities, and I think it maybe is something that will require a more in-depth conversation, but we are willing to have it, and I'm willing philosophically to have it because I feel, respectfully, that those are some of the facilities that will lift people's self-esteem, people who come and would make them feel a part of Trinidad and give the government value for the money that we put out for these facilities.
Now, I understand what my colleague is saying, but as he rightly pointed out, let us get the material, because I know for a fact that you have to go into our communities to identify talent. You have to identify talent so that when you identify the talent and with these high-performing facilities, you take these young people in for a program of training so that those young people at the end of the day can come top athletes, whether it's in swimming or tennis or cycling. But you have, so it is a process. So I understand what my colleague is saying. I also appreciate what you are saying too, Mr. Camacho, and therefore we submit what you have to submit, and as he said, we will drill down into the details later on. This is not we are not bargaining here, we are not negotiating. We are just dealing with broad principles, and we have requirements and needs now in our communities. And therefore, you have a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So, Madam Permanent Secretary, the floor is yours.
Chairman, if I may, because you did directly back at me. Yeah. Totally agree with you, and I like how you phrased that last bit about 1, 2, 3, because that's exactly how we have it. What we call the different facilities are graded in that way. Clearly, with the caveats I've said, they are available. They're probably utilized much more than we think. That they are, like if you went up to the tennis center over the last, I don't know how long, you'd see morning to night. If you go to the swimming pool, they utilize heavily. If you go to the cycle velodrome, you'll see youngsters in there training all the time, but again, training under supervision. And those are very elite facilities. But all the others, the Hazy Crawford, you can't book it. The Woodbrook Youth Center, book from in the morning till 11. In fact, the question I have as chairman is why you can't open the facility 24/7 at Woodbrook Youth Center, right? As an example. Of course, you then have the security and all the other attributes that you can't utilize a surface, any surface, 24/7 without damaging it. You've got to have the downtime, repair, clean, etc., etc. So, Chairman, I agree, it's not a bargaining thing, but I think we're on the same page. Our view is get as many people out as possible into sport, and I say it in a broad way, into sport in general. Teach them sport, not necessarily sport, specific sport, but any sport. So I think we're on the same page, and I'll hand over to my colleague from
and
the
before I
ministry.
ask the ministry to get in, the permanent secretary, Mr. Camacho, is there a report that you produce on an annual basis that would provide Trinidad and Tobago with an appreciation of the numbers of citizens who have been able to access your various facilities? And most importantly, you see, the school population, the primary schools, the secondary school, this relationship you have with the Ministry of Education. Is there a reflection of the utilization of these various facilities throughout the country that you can provide in your reports indicating in the year 2019, in the year 2020, up to 2022, we had 100,000 citizens utilizing these various facilities, broken down as follows. At the community level, how many thousand? At the primary school level. So, do you have such data available for public consumption, Mr. Camacho?
I will ask Karen to handle that only because the answer is a two-part answer.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the utilization data, we don't have it as granular as that. So to determine that, let's say if we take Woodbrook Youth Facility as an example, that over the month of March, that 1,000 people would have utilized it. We do recognize that that is important data that we need to capture, and we are beginning to put things in place because data collection in itself requires resources, it requires a certain amount of sensitization, but we are aware that is important. What we do right now in terms of utilization data, it generally would just take into consideration by hour and client. So let's just say, for instance, Mr. Camacho made reference to the Hazy Crawford Stadium, and we know if the track and field teams, that they would use it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or whatever it is, we will capture the hours of use like that, and then we report in terms of hours of use. It is a current exercise within Sport Company in terms of being a little more specific for that same reason, that we could be in a position to report, to say, okay, at the aquatic center, we would have welcomed 1,000 people over the period of the first quarter. That is something that we would like to get to, and we're working on it.
I'll come back, but I have to invite my colleague, Mrs. Renuka Sagram Singh. I just want to put you on notice. I would like to get from the sports company and maybe the ministry the total number of employees on your establishment, the total number that is required, given your new strategic direction, in terms of the period 2018 to 2023, in terms of your organizational structure, or they call it organogram. Could you let us know, first of all, what is your complement requirement for you to run an efficiently and effective company called Sport TT? What is the deficit or the gap that exists or existed between 2018 up to 2022? And as you project into 2023 to 2028, what is your complement required that you are projecting? I think that those are important matters that we need to pay attention to. But as I said, I'll ask my colleague, Renuka Sagram Singh Suklal, to take the floor, and we will come back again.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the opportunity. I really didn't interject because, of course, Chair, other members, yourself, and of course, Member Scotland would have asked critical questions that was, in my mind, relative to accessibility, because at the end of the day, that to me is paramount in the work that Sports TT has to do, making your facilities, whether it's the high-tech or high-end facilities, from the community-based ones that you have a mandate over, the issues about accessibility. And of course, we ask a lot of questions concerning, and then we have asked the committee to provide to the company to provide to us a list of those facilities. So Chair, thank you all most sincerely for already leading the charge in making said request. Now, I do agree with Member Scotland relative to the comment of, not encouraging handouts and not encouraging a social welfare society, for want of a better word. But, I've heard a lot of comments about certain fees and the use of facilities being minimal fees. But I just want to respectfully remind everyone that the word minimal is very relative, and it's relative to someone's circumstance, as we all know. For example, when I was in high school, $20 was the amount of, not in high school actually, in university, I got an allowance of $20 a day from my parents, 15 of which was for passage alone. $5, you really can't do much with that. And let us bear in mind that while, yes, we do not want to encourage citizens to rely upon just the state to give me and give me and give me, at the same time, there are people who their social reality is at $15 an hour they cannot afford. And I believe that it is imperative as an organization and as an entity, and that's what I want to springboard out of a comment that Member Scotland made about innovation and being innovative as an entity, as a company, to be able to determine, okay, what am I going to be able to do in order to make my facilities and my mandate more accessible to even that child or that young person, that $15 an hour is very difficult for they to be able to pay, recognizing that the term nominal fees is very relative. And that's why I brought my personal experience into the mix. And it's not something that I'm ashamed of at all. So I just wanted to make that critical point, and I believe that is something that the company has to focus on. And paramount is, of course, I know even in your submissions, and of course, Chairman, you would have made mention to and it's in your submissions, Sports TT submissions, you indicated that one of the weaknesses faced is the inability to retain revenue for reinvestment. And perhaps if you're able to develop that revenue stream, you can become self-sufficient and then be able to access access and be able to provide develop strategies, as I would have suggested, relative to accessibility and making these facilities accessible to those people who even the $15 are always too difficult for they to be able to pay. Now, I know, Chairman, in your submissions you would have mentioned that, and this is something I would have to research as well, you mentioned that your inability to retain and your inability to reinvest may be predicated on legislation in the Exchequer and Audit Act. I have not had the opportunity to cross-check the law, and of course I'm not going to speak out or turn on the law, being a lawyer myself. But if it is that there is a legislative blockade that is preventing sports TT from being able to reinvest and to be able to retain revenue, then it's an advocacy that you all have to actively engage in for that legislative change to come about. And I speak now from the point of my ministerial portfolio, if I may respectfully, Chair, through you. Legislation is marked or amendments to the law is brought by policy changes, and a line ministry alone ought not to take the responsibility if laws are not being amended. The entity has a responsibility to advocate to their ministry and advocate using data, advocate using sound policy, why it is we may require an amendment in the law. And that is the chain of legislation. So you have an entity, you do the advocacy, you create the policy. If you believe that there's a legislative blockade in your inability to retain, in your inability to reinvest, you do the advocacy, you create the policy. The structure now is that you go to your line ministry with that, and your line ministry, of course, forwards it. Once they can accept that policy, and it's accepted, of course, by the cabinet, then it comes to the Office of the Attorney General, where the necessary amendments and legislation would then be reviewed for consideration for us to be able to then do the legislative work to provide you with the teeth that you need, the strength and power that you need to be able to deliver on your mandate. So my question now, Chair, with that being said, have there been any serious investigation from a policy perspective relative to what has been, basically causing that problem as it relates to reinvestment and retaining revenue?
Thank you. Well, first of all, the advocacy you speak about started many, many years ago. And along the way, we actually had a very temporary respite in that it was thought, being a fact that we were under a company ordinance and not under an act of parliament like some of the other state enterprises, that we could collect revenue, and we were so advised. And shortly after we started to collect the revenue, we received a communique from, this is why I say maybe the Exchequer Act, right, from that division of the state, telling us that we are not designated a revenue collecting agency, and we must cease and desist from the activities we were doing. We have continued then to advocate in the manner that you have spoken about, and I know that the ministry could speak for themselves, but they are now championing the cause for us through the process that, as you have described it. But I think I would be considered slightly naive if I thought that that was a process that, even well articulated, where we prepared to write the draft of the act if they wish, or the approval if we were so requested, that could happen easily. Because first of all, it has to get onto your legislative agenda. How important is this with the million other things that are equally competing for time, the resources of the state to be able to do what is required to then get back to us? I have a suspicion that this is not going to be considered a very critical element to jump the queue. But I say that not to say that we aren't going to pursue it, because you hear how passionate I am about it. You saw it in my report there. You'll see it in the 2024-28 strat plan as a critical to do again. So, remember, that's music to my ears. You're talking to a choir member here where that is concerned. But I don't know if the ministry wishes to speak for themselves.
Chair and member, thank you, Chairman Camacho. So the ministry is aware of the efforts being made by Sport TT to designate them as a retainer of their revenue. The conversation has begun, and members, you rightly said, it needs to be supported by a proper, well-researched evidence policy in order to convince the cabinet, when we do go to cabinet, that Sport TT should be so designated. So between the ministry and Sport TT, we have advanced the conversation a little bit further because the issue of rates tie directly into, to prove your case, prove our case, the Sport TT's case, of how much revenue is being lost. So simultaneously, we are looking at a revision of rates, which will be part of the note that will eventually be submitted to cabinet. The Sport TT is currently working on terms of reference for a consultant, because if you're looking at rates, you need to look proper research. You need to look at the local scenario, the Caribbean, Latin America, similar scenarios to have that sort of evidence and benchmark to bench our rates again. So that is currently being done, and we hope before the end of this fiscal to have that sort of policy document to drive this discussion beyond the ministry, take it to the cabinet, and then onward for legislative review.
Thank you very much, P.S. Edwards. And you said it. It's about, because to convince, of course, the government, it can't be that you're just pulling figures out of a hat or from the sky. It has to be evidence-based. And I'm very pleased to know that at least at the ministry, and of course, with the advocacy began with Sports TT, it continues with the ministry. But of course, Chairman, I want to believe, as a legislator as well, yes, there are many topics in queue on our legislative agenda, but you see, something is as important as you make it, and the advocacy must continue irrespective of in your entity, in your ministry, sports matters are critical, and that conversation has to continue. And of course, I'm very pleased, Chairman, that at least we are at this stage. You're at the stage where there is now a consultant. You're putting pen to paper. There, you're solidifying a policy position which can then be onward transmitted. So I'm grateful to know that that has happened. Chair, with respect to, well, we did ask our questions relative to accessibility, questions relative to getting the list of, company facilities, that Sports TT, of course, has a general oversight of. And for now, Chair, that is the extent of my questions. I'll just go through what I have here.
Okay, thank you. I want to state that from my material, the sports company of TNT would have been incorporated almost around 2004. So you have been advocating, or not you directly or others, but of course you being the chairman, for a provision or the ability to retain your revenue that you would generate. And well, the PS is now telling us that they will have to get some consultancy on board, and we don't know how long this will take. But it is something that we... Yeah.
Chairman, this fiscal year.
Yeah.
This fiscal year. Well, I should say, from my perspective, Chairman,
yeah,
I want this thing done and dusted by the end of this fiscal year, so from 20.
Well, I'm
I mean, I don't know if it's possible.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you would like that.
Very optimistic, but
I'm sure you have been advocating that for
since I become chairman.
So let's hope that. No, but I think that you are addressing an issue, given the nature of your operation, that I find to be quite reasonable, right? Because you have to generate, And given the nature of this operation called Sports TT, I think it's something that is will find, favor with my own self, because I understand what is being promoted at this time. So what I want to come back to is the core activities of this organization called Sport TT. I see construction and facility maintenance. You mentioned sport for all. You national oversight and support, and you talk about the elite athletes, right? Now, when it comes to the issue of construction and facility maintenance, Mr. Chairman Douglas Camacho, how is that done? And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. You are supposed to be involved in the construction. Now, so the design, the development, the, let's say, construction, the maintenance of these facilities under the sports company of TNT, that's supposed to be your mandate. Tell me if I'm wrong, and you'll have to clarify for me. One is developing the, or one is coming to some tentative conclusions that the sports company is not doing this. For instance, swimming pools. Who is constructing? Do you outsource? I should rephrase it. Do you outsource the construction of, let's say, swimming pools to UDCOT, for example? And so that's the first thing. Do you deal with these things directly, or do you outsource these things, and to who you outsource these things to? And what are the mechanisms that you establish for supervision, for oversight, so at the end of the day, the quality that you expect at the end of the process will be satisfied? So these are some of my preliminary issues as it relates to the construction and facility maintenance. If you could clarify for us as a committee, and I'll appreciate it very much.
Certainly. Well, in the first instance, in terms of the construction, and I will hand it over to two of my colleagues for the two different elements. Let me deal with the construction first. We don't have a full-fledged engineering department and the full work, so it's not that we are going to go and do the actual activities ourselves. So we have a process. Where required, we might have to go and do an RFP and all the other things that invite tenders, people come in, so different projects, different people. In fairness, what we try to do too is, if it's a community type one, and I'm just using this illustratively, but we did one down in Maruga, we try to encourage the business people associated with that type of construction work to bid. Sometimes they don't come forward because they think this is our big, state thing, and we try to encourage them by making them aware that this is for anybody to bid. Anybody could come in, because very often you get a keener price from them for two reasons. One, they're not the big providers that have all the overhead, and two, because they immersed in the community, they want to deliver. And so we have found some savings with regard to that. Process-wise, we follow, again, proper procurement practices. That has been the mantra. I could speak for the time when I'm chairman. Yes. I can't speak for what occurred in the past, right? Way back. So that deals with the construction side. And I'll ask Anisha to speak to that when I'm finished the second bit. With regard to the maintenance of facilities, what we recognized is that we as a people tend to be exceptional at building new things. And I can't say that I will give us the same passing grade for the maintenance of what we have built after the fact. And whether it's government buildings and government people in sporting facilities otherwise, we seem to not put the same sort of emphasis and focus to provide the kind of resource to really do it properly. What we have done on our side is and I'll ask David to speak to it, but we actually got professionals to tell us what would a proper preventative maintenance program look like and what would that cost. And I'll be very direct here, and I'm sure it is not only sport that will have this challenge, but the country has it. If we felt that it took $10 million a year to maintain a facility, and the Parliament through the budgets, etc., decide make do with 6, Chairman, we look at the 10 million, and we say what is critical, what can 6 buy us? How many activities within the schedule can the 6 million buy us? Because we cannot spend what we don't have, right? But we have made our case very clearly of this is what the optimum position would look like. Would you all leave now? I'll ask Anisha first.
Before, who is next?
Anisha will speak on the project side, and then David will speak on the facilities.
All right, before they speak.
And we do outsource, to answer your question, absolutely.
Okay. What is the relationship between UDCOT and the sports company of Trinidad and Tobago? Is UDCOT involved in the construction of swimming pools without your knowledge? Or are you outsourcing the construction of swimming pools to UDCOT for its construction? Because I am getting the impression, and you can guide me on this, that UDCOT is constructing swimming pools in the country. And the question that I need to have clarified, as the company with the mandate to construct these things, I just wanted to ask you if you could clarify for our committee whether there is any truth in this statement that UDCOT is also competing with you in the construction of swimming pool, or whether you have engaged UDCOT to construct swimming pools on your behalf. Could you clarify first?
Again, Anisha will explain exactly how the process works. But yes, we do engage other people. In this case, UDCOT uses as an example to build the swimming pools. We engage UDCOT to build the Diego Martin complex he alluded to earlier, to build the one in Moruga. So we do engage them, but we then keep we have the responsibility of oversight, which at times, let's just say there could be a healthy tension between ourselves and UDCOT. We have a good working relationship, but there could be a healthy tension because they would come forward with something and we'd say, well, if the cabinet approved it, if there's proof of everything, we could sign off. If not, we would hold them to account. And so that's why I use the word a healthy tension. But that's our role, and that's our responsibilities, and we're going to do it fearlessly. And where the chips fall, the chips fall. But it is a fact that we do outsource those kinds of activities. But I'll pass it over because Anisha is the one that deals with them, on the UDCOT especially, and those things day by day, and then David will handle the actual programs and stuff that we have put in place with regard to maintenance and how our vision of how it should be done.
Hi, good day, Chairman, Anisha Colley, Sport Company again, Head of Projects Execution. So to clarify the arrangement between UDCOT and Sport Company, and by extension, the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, the arrangement is actually one that is presented to the Cabinet. We get instruction via Cabinet minutes. The Cabinet minutes would present UDCOT as the entity that would project manage the services relative to the construction of the swimming pools. Sport will be assigned to provide monitor and oversight. And the Cabinet minute would also speak to the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, entering into an agreement with UDCOT to provide these project management services. So there's a three-way arrangement, a three-way arrangement between all entities that come together to ensure that these pools are constructed.
May I just clarify as you go along?
Sure.
I don't know if you could help this committee to indicate or to guide us. Was it always like that, or was it where, you see, I'm getting a bit, there are some areas that are blurred and hazy.
I understand.
Because I am looking at a company called Sports TT, right, incorporated under the Companies Act, right? And I understand the mandate of that committee is to construct, right? So if they are to construct, they are also to determine, given their mandate, the requirements. Of course, there's an overall policy-making body. But in terms of saying, listen, we are going to construct in X area or Y area, and I am going to make requests for proposals to invite, because I'm the company and I'm mandated. Now, you're telling me that you have a three-way process, right? So one coming, project manager is this one. And then oversight is you.
Correct.
And then final, well, so what I'm asking and thinking through you, and maybe Ms. Camacho can guide me on it, was it always like this? In other words, how long this came into existence, or whether it was always like this? That is what I'm trying to
Well, I'll speak to the time that I have been chairman. There was a hiatus. There wasn't much activity in the first year or two of my chairmanship. But then in the last couple of years, we have seen some activity. Right. And that is the way it has been. And certainly as you described the higher policy. So if a policy decision comes from the cabinet that says we're building a swimming pool in Maloney, that'd be a policy decision handed down. They would say to Sport TT, we're looking to build this swimming pool in Maloney, and whether it is that Unicode is to be contracted in the way that Anisha explained it, right? But we want you to take the oversight, the way I described it, for this project. So they project manage it, we oversee it, the cabinet knows details very clearly, what the quantum is, what they're supposed to be doing, etc. And we have to sign off on it before the funds are released by the Ministry of Finance to us to pay Unicode. So it comes through us to pay Unicode. Now, Unicode, unlike others, seems to have access to funds that they could forward fund, which is a positive, because in many cases people don't. And if you can't get the money in front, it tends to, my words now, shrink the pool of potential candidates available to you. Obviously, if people have the capital and they could carry the project, fine. If they can't, then there's always a challenge for money, like everybody else, cash flows, et cetera, et cetera. So that is kind of how it works. And it has certainly been so in my recent past. Now, maybe Anisha goes back before, she definitely goes back before my time. She could say whether in the past it was always so, or whether sport company did it differently in the past. I really can't speak to that, Chairman. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, you could continue.
Chairman, I would have joined in 2017, and from joining that arrangement as it relates to the construction of the community swimming pools would have in fact been around from since that time. However, I think what maybe need to be clarified is the facility we have under the answer bond, which would have facilitated the national sporting facilities that would have been directly constructed under sport, and UDCOT would not have been involved in that process. So for example, the National Aquatic Center, that would have been directly constructed, managed under sport company, and that would have been that would have been prior to my joining in 2017.
Okay. All right. I understand the point that you are making. Mr. Camacho, I think that there are some areas that we'll have to come back to, but I think this company called Sport TT should, there should be greater autonomy in the operation of the sports company of TNT. And I find it a bit interesting that from what you have just said, I am getting the distinct impression that the sports company is merely a conduit, like a channel for activities that is taken at another level. So sometimes you are getting the impression that your company, it doesn't have the muscle to determine. The reason why I'm saying this is exactly, I wanted you to clarify for this committee, when it comes to swimming pools that you are instructed to build and just oversight, right? Are those swimming pools, the design, to ensure standards are satisfied? What is your role as the sports company? Do you have any say, or you are just only told to oversight? But all the decisions on the design, the standards, whether it's national or international standards, who decide those things? The sports company, or that is decided for the sports company? I'm just trying to clarify.
No, good question. No, I think one would have to answer that by saying in conjunction with. So it depends what it is. You're using the pools as the example. So what we have identified is the pools should be of a minimum size so that it could meet competition type requirements. And those basically in the case of swimming is either 25 or 50-meter pool. So back in the day where it was done, people would put in what I guess my words now, what the land could have accommodated. So it might be 30 meters or whatever. Much like, if you remember the J.P. Small cycle velodrome, that was whatever, 500 meters. The one in Arima, which is why you don't have kilo and specific distance races in Arima, is because it was built as a cycle track without that standard you speak to. So that when they have a race, they call it a 20 lap. They can't say a 10 kilo because they don't know the precise measure in that regard. It's not a 250 or 333, which are the international standards. So in the case of the pools, we have advised, and again, ours is an advisory role in that regard. We do participate in arriving at those kinds of decisions in terms of standards, etc., and recommend, right? In terms of where it goes and all of that, as you rightly described it, I think the way it's described is a kind of policy decision of the state that says, okay, we would like the communities all over Trinidad and Tobago to have access, so let us position them all over Trinidad and Tobago. So you have one in Siparia, one in Cuba, one in wherever. And they try to spread it around, right? That's a policy decision. We don't say to them, no, don't put it there. Well, that's not our remit. We are the implementing arm, is the word I used. In that regard. We are the implementing arm for those kinds of cabinet or state decisions, which is really through our line ministry, the Ministry of Sport and Community Development.
So how do we get costs? How do we get costs? Because you are supervising, you are overseeing things. We want to know as a committee, what is the final cost of the construction of pools that you have overseen for the last couple of years? In other words, how many pools you have overseen since you have been there as chairman, or for the period, let's say, that we are covering, let's say 2019 to 2020. How many pools have been constructed? How many pools are to be constructed? What are the costs of these pools? For instance, the Bagatelle Sporting Complex, again, were you the initiator, or were you the supervisor, or the person just overseeing? And what was the cost of that particular exercise?
Yeah.
And are these things subject to cost overruns? In other words, when you are asked to oversee these things, did they come in at one cost? For instance, 6 million. And at the end of the process, seeing that you have to sign off, right? What was the final cost? Was it 10 million? Did it remain at 6 million? So could you provide all of these things in writing?
Sure, that you could get for sure, but let me just say that is where I mentioned the healthy tension. I smile only because that's where the healthy tension comes in. Because if the cabinet minute says, just to take as an example, a swimming pool, and we have approved $3 million. I know things are never so quite rounded. $3 million, and that this is what is meant to be delivered. And somebody decides along the way, you know, we should add, I don't know, a squash court onto it, or a pavilion. And that came to us in Sport TT. We'd say, Cabinet no doesn't say that. So unless you go for, and I don't know what's the political term, but unless you go back to the Cabinet for a waiver or a variation or whatever, we're not paying that, because our remit was very clear in the Cabinet note. This is what is meant to be. And we do get, that's where the healthy tension comes in. So we push back and say no, justify it, or bring the Cabinet approval for that variation, if it's a variation. So we could certainly let you know what the costs were for the ones under which we had oversight and responsibility, which is the pools you mentioned, and the bagatelle one, and so on. So we certainly have that data.
Right, so you could provide that as in writing.
Sure.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask Mr. Camacho, what is your complement of staff right now?
Can I ask Ruan to answer that? I mean, I don't want to guess, because...
Yes, of course.
Today as in 2023,
yes,
right? Ruan?
As we speak, what's the current complement? And what is the required complement in order for Sport TT to operate an efficient outfit?
Hi, good morning, Chair. Ruan Pearson, Head, Employee Experience and Central Services from Sport Company. Presently, as at the end of March, we have 112 contract employees with us at Sport. Based on our approved org chart, we require 195 persons to function.
Okay. So what attempts are being made to bring your staffing up to the required standard or level that you have just mentioned? You want 95.
We would have written to the Ministry of Sport and Community Development with a list of critical jobs which we needed to recruit for, and based on the approval received, we have been engaging in recruitment exercises since 2020, which would have brought us to this figure at this time, and we continue with that process.
Do you have any written statement or any analysis that would have been done showing how the deficit or the gap in the staffing arrangement is affecting the operations of this company called Sports Company of TNT? Or put it another way, how has this deficit been impacting negatively on your operations?
So it has impacted on our ability to deliver in terms of some of the services that we seek to provide, and it also has restricted we have also acquired new facilities as at the end of September 2020, which we are also trying to address with the present staff requirements that we have.
Now, would you say that, let's look at your counting unit. I saw in your submission, your 98% capacity. You have a 98% capacity, 2% deficit. But I noticed in your submission and a management letter that we got from this, the new auditors, I should say, that there are some challenges that you are facing. Can you tell us, for example, there was a question about accrued vacation and gratuity schedule, where apparently there was one statement recorded in your submission, and when it was being properly audited, another statement was provided. Yes, another statement was provided. So I was wondering to what extent your staffing problem might have contributed to this gap. Names were mentioned. I don't want to call the names of the people. I don't think it's fair to them to call their names, but we have information about persons who were supposed to take 5 days and they end up taking 29, right? What caused that in terms of your situation? And as you're on that, do you have an internal auditor? And if you don't have one, why?
So I'm not aware of the situation that you're speaking of. And yes, we do have an internal auditor. And she's
You have an internal auditor?
Yes, we do.
Okay, well, okay, well, I'm glad about that.
Chairman, they seem to be doing well.
No.
Macro,
Well, I'm happy to know.
we need to drill down.
Yeah, yeah. Now, no.
Chairman, if I could, what year that is alluding to? With the 5 and 29. I don't know any names, just what year? So that
we are talking about the year that we are examining.
29.
Right, so we are looking at 2019 and 2020 accounts. That is what we are looking at, right? So there is some we have some challenges, right? And I think that we would need to have some clarification from the persons who are in the accounting area of the operation, right? So we'll probably have to forward questions to your good self to address some of the issues that I wanted to have clarified at this time.
Chairman,
yes.
I have one issue I want to ask.
Yes, you go ahead.
Chairman, through you, I want to address the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago and then the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. How do you see your role in going forward, because you are now developing your 2024 to 2028 strategic plan? How do you see your role in going forward in driving that engine of sport, or driving sport as an engine of change in Trinidad and Tobago? How do you see your role, the role of the sport company, in going forward in using sport as an engine of change in Trinidad and Tobago? I would ask sport and the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. And not long, but I just want
I'll give you a crisp answer. We see Sport TT playing an integral role. In fact, we see Sport TT as taking the lead in that regard and helping with our line ministry to create, where necessary, national policy, etc. If required, we are following at the moment the approved program of the country, government sports program. But where we see it necessary that we want to influence policy change, if required, to effect it, we see ourselves taking the lead, as I mentioned in my earlier submission, in creating sport beyond, as I referred to it, where people think of it as recreation, to be something more than that, a business, an income-generating thing, an employment activity, taking deviant behavior and creating channels to channel that pent-up energy of young people in a positive direction. We see it as an opportunity for people to get things that would not otherwise be available to them, what they couldn't avail themselves of, scholarships, etc. We are very active. We have partnerships going with the universities in Trinidad and Tobago, signed partnerships in how we propose to do that. We have additionally one signed with the University of Portsmouth in the UK, who very much drive that program in the UK to develop those things. So remember, we see ourselves playing a pivotal and critical role in that regard. As I say, we keep scope creep. Sports TT has definitely had scope creep in what we have taken onto ourselves and on what we have put ourselves forward as best positioned to drive the government's overall program for sport development in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a bit of a scope creep beyond our direct remit, as the chairman had identified again from 2005. I know you wanted the ministry to speak to.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Member. Chairman, with your permission, I will ask the Director Sport Division, Mr. McTeer, to respond.
Thank you very much, Pierce. The Ministry of Sport and Community Development continues to develop sport through our National Policy on Sport 2017 to 2027. We are at that sort of midway of that policy cycle at this particular point in time. And at this current juncture, what we seek to do is to continue working on pushing or advocating for the development of sport and for sport for development, which are the two main pillars of the national policy on sport. That will follow, or that will manifest itself in a number of ways. Number one, we are definitely looking at creating better partnerships and ensuring that the development of sport is able to touch the national fabric of Trinidad and Tobago through the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, through the universities, the main universities being UE and UTT, working with the Ministry of Health as well, through partnerships in their TT Moves program. Also, with the engagement of the government of Jamaica, as Mr. Sirott would have earlier mentioned, we, through that multi-sector, multi-sport stakeholder committee that would have attended that, those two visits, we are developing a pathway for sport development in Trinidad and Tobago. We're starting with track and field in the first instance, and we're looking at spreading that to other sports. So we are ready at this particular point in time. We have two main overall programs that we use for sport development, being the Shape in Communities program and the Pink Rain campaign, which is more geared towards specifically developing women in sport. And through such, we continue the process of manifesting the statutes of the sport policy.
And having said that, Chairman, through you, and this is my final question, you are the Sport Company of Trinidad and Tobago, you are the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, and you are addressing the young people of Trinidad and Tobago, yes? In Port-au-Spain South, we have a rich history of sportsmen from Clint Marcel, Russell Atapia, Keel Hussein. If you don't look sharp, we would claim Dwight York, all right? What would you say to the young people of Trinidad and Tobago? Because time is not our friend now, but what would you say to them as it relates to making sport a part of changing their pathway, changing their trajectory? Chairman, that's my last question.
What do you say to young people who want to become involved in sport? We, the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, and I could say by extension the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, we have been working with our national governing bodies. We have been working with clubs in communities towards giving them the necessary capacity to be able to engage young people. As the ministry and the sports company directly, yes, we can provide certain programs. For example, the April Pools program that is still ongoing because it's going through the month of April. We actually were able to engage a number of youth groups, the St. Jude's School for Girls, the police youth clubs in particular areas as it relates to the Learn to Swim programs that have taken place at Laventille Swimming Pool, Mova, and Maloney. We are now busing persons from La Hoqueta to go to the aquatic center to be able to learn about life-saving rescue skills, etc. So yes, there are certain things that we can do. However, we understand as well that the true development of sport and the pathway development of sport, whether it be from cradle to grave or just for the sake of understanding a person's body through sport, and how that also impacts on their psychosocial development, it's a matter of having the national governing bodies and our sports clubs in communities become much better able, much better capable of doing so, whether it be financially and through technical capacity building. So we ask that young people, one, engage with the sports groups in your area. I think in the vast number of communities where there are sports installations, whether they may be recreational grounds under the Ministry of Local Government, hard court basketball courts under same ministry, or the indoor facilities under the Ministry of Sport and Community Development, the pools, etc. We do have programs on offer. Engage the facilities, engage the sporting programs that you see taking place in those communities, and the ministry is there to provide that level of assistance to these groups and to make sure that, one, there's accessibility, but two, there's also the capacity for them to be able to ensure that the young people that engage in these programs are able to develop themselves, both in sport and through life, by simply just starting to participate. So I think the first thing is really find where sport is taking place, engage it.
Engage. Right? Thank you.
Chairman, if I could, I know, just to add one last comment, and only because the member mentioned one or two, notable sports icons and one that he tried to claim through the back door. But that aside, it's notable that a number that we have, and I'll use the young people language now, what they call them influencers.
Yes.
I think is the term now. And you talk about the program that is ongoing in the pools. Carter himself, Dylan Carter, who's, I guess, our high-profile athlete.
Very, very close to Port of Spain South.
Right, he's very involved he's very involved in the programs in April.
Very involved.
So they're giving back. You have Jareem, you have Latas, you have a number of them have agreed and have already started participating, because the interesting thing is, I go there and I say, fellas, and I give them all the right reasons why. And they listen to me and they say, well, boy, he ain't catching his nene like us, He probably drive up here to start with. When he leave and go on his walk, had to walk 3 miles to get home or whatever. But when the people who they look up to speak to it, it is coming from a different place.
It is.
And we have identified that sometime now, and we have engaged these people, right? And I mean, sometimes I go with them on the difference. Mention, as I say, Carter in the pools. I remember the little sailor boy, Louis, going down and starting a program in Labre. Now, he's from Diego Martin too, so you could claim him again, Tuki. And look at the program. It has kicked off, and they have it has sustained itself. Though he's abroad coaching internationally now, he keeps the touch. And that little program in Labre is sustainable. It is not a flash in the pan. It didn't happen and finish. So I think that is another critical, I mentioned human resource when I was saying about capacity building. That kind of resource needs to be harnessed and encouraged to be these influencers. And I tell you, that will be a multiplier, a geometric increase, not no linear increase. If we could get those people really come in and encourage the youth, get off the street. There's an alternative lifestyle. You don't have to be with a gun. Learn to shoot a football instead of a gun. I mean, I get passionate, as you realize.
Yes.
All right, thank you so very much, Mr. Camacho. We are about to draw the curtains on our proceedings. And in doing so, may I again, on behalf of our committee, extend our thanks to officials from the Ministry of Finance, Investments Division, the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course the Ministry of Sport and Community Development. Now, there are some areas that we would have to write to the sports company on, and whilst we compliment the sports company for being at least you have completed, according to the submission made earlier, all your financials, and you have submitted according to the submission made by the investment division to the Parliament. I just want to indicate that there are many questions that we will be submitting to the sports company to provide us with some clarification on, and that is for the period 2019 to 2020. Those are the accounts that are before us. So I just put you on notice to expect those questions that will be coming your way very soon. We want to, again, record our appreciation and thanks for your presence and for the engagement that we have had over the last few hours. At this time, we'll now want to suspend the proceedings to allow your good selves to take your leave, and we want to wish you a safe return journey to your respective workplaces. So we'd like to thank again Permanent Secretary. We'd like to thank Mr. Douglas Camacho and his team, and of course the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry, the Director, I should say, in the Mrs. Sharon Mohammed, and her colleague for being here. So at this time, we will want to suspend to allow you to take your leave, and thank you once again for coming.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.